All right, welcome back. This is our final segment of this day. We have what we call a policy panel, and then we'll offer final closing remarks. One of the things that we do at the Crane Center that I think is really special is we work to engage closely with policymakers, because let's be real, at the end of the day, our policymakers are the ones who are driving change. So every year we host a policy panel to engage with those who develop and implement policies affecting children. And I am so pleased to welcome this. I see this as a very special panel. Director Bivens, Representative Howse, and Councilwoman Tyson. And what's really nice about this panel is they span the continuum of city to county to state. And I would like to welcome our very special moderator, Dr. Valerie Alloy. Dr. Alloy leads the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services Early Childhood Mental Health Initiative. And you know how important that is today. She's an experienced behavioral health policy administrator, educator, researcher, and practitioner. The department's mental health initiatives, called The Whole Child Matters, is the nation's largest investment in early childhood mental health and has received national recognition from such institutions as Georgetown and Yale University. Before Dr. Alloy served in this role, she was in the psychology department of the Department of Youth Services, working with the most violent and dangerous youth offenders. She's a subject matter expert on mental health, especially early childhood mental health, prevention, research, equity, and public health policy topics. She's also a licensed supervising clinician and a passionate agent of change. And we've had Dr. Alloy speak at events before, and today we wanted her to serve as our moderator and bring the voices of our policymakers to bear. So Dr. Alloy, I am gonna turn this over to you.
Well, thank you so very much, Dr. Justice, and I'd like to just welcome and bless the audience, the tremendous national audience that is participating in today's symposium, and my esteemed panelists and colleagues on this particular session. So my task today is to obviously introduce our panelists, and then what we're going to do is I have a question, two general questions that we're going to ask each of you to respond to. And then I have a specific question for each of you in your capacities and in your role. Around the 2:30 or so mark, we're going to open it up to questions from the audience and then try to facilitate a dynamic aspect to close today's incredible work. When the conference first opened, I was very taken by Director Justice's comment that when we know better, we have to do better. And so we know that in our culture, that's talk we know. And because you all are here, we're not just going to talk about it today. My goal is that we really help our participants to be about the business of anti-racist work. So with that, I'm going to give a brief high-level overview of each of our panelists today. And I did have to look something up. You can Google it. Googling it has become a transitive verb. I'm like, when did it become Google something? But it is now a transitive verb. So you guys can Google each of our panelists for a deep dive on their tremendous, tremendous accomplishments. But from a high level, I absolutely want to share some important things. I'm going to begin with a brief bio for Director Joy Bivens. She serves as the director of the Franklin County Department of Job and Family Services, which is the largest agency under the guidance of the Board of Commissioners. Franklin County is also the largest county in the state with more than 1.3 million residents. She leads a staff of more than 600 full-time people, and Job and Family Services at the local level serves as the county's first line of social safety, as our social safety net. In addition to determining eligibility for food assistance, Ohio Works First cash assistance, Medicaid, and publicly funded childcare, the agency also provides millions in funding for family supportive services, including youth after-school programs, health science academies, summer employment opportunities, and workforce development services. And just as a note, roughly 1 in 4 Franklin County residents receive some type of assistance from the Franklin County Department of Job and Family Services. I took a moment to highlight that because this is all about the social determinants and those factors that drive the issues that we're here talking about today. So I just wanted you all to get some scope for what Director Bivens is in charge of. In addition, she commissioned an in-depth analysis of our landscape for childcare. It goes on and on and on. Vice Chair of the National Association of Counties and Human Services. At the state level, she serves on the executive committee and co-chairs the Metro County Directors Committee for Ohio for the Job and Family Directors Association, and many other things. I would like to add that she is a wife and mother, and those 4 functions are equally critical in our work. I'm going to switch over to Representative, and welcome Director Bivens. I'm going to switch over to Representative Stephanie Howse. Stephanie Howse is a sister from Cleveland, Ohio, so I'm going to acknowledge that, where she has lived most of her life in Ward 7. Representative Howse is a graduate of the Cleveland School of Arts, where she studied vocal and instrumental music. I note that because of the side of the brain that instruments use and art uses. After high school, she used the other side of her brain and became an undergrad and earned her graduate degree in civil environmental engineering from Florida A&M University and her master's in environmental studies from Cleveland State. A few other highlights. Her inspiration for going into public service comes from many people, but we're gonna note her ancestor, her mother, Annie L. Key, who gave her the leadership and the heart and the guidance for public service. And in addition to serving as a Representative Howse has started many important grassroots organizations to stand up esteem, and particularly Footprints. It's a leading girls leadership development and mentoring organization operating inside the Thurgood Marshall Recreation Center. I highlight that because, again, it's one of those constructs that affect our social determinants of Black women, and I wanted to highlight that. I'm seeing if there's more things. I Googled you, actually, Director Howse. That's when I looked up the term Google, and I see that, Representative Howse has advocated for numerous policy initiatives for COVID-19 funding in our targeted communities, prenatal maternal health, voter registration, Equal Pay Act, and on and on. So we appreciate your service and your warriorship and stewardship of critical issues to change the effect of our social determinants. And I wanted to highlight that in looking at your bio as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alloy. I'm like, ooh, who that girl? Okay. I'm taking that. I'm giving me a short. Oh, you looking at a warrior here. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'm one of her fans. She don't know that, Dr. Alloy, but I've been one of her fans for a long time.
Very good. And then not last and never least, I'd like to introduce Columbus City Council member, Priscilla Tyson. A dedicated leader and lifelong resident of Columbus, Priscilla Tyson joined the City Council in January of 2007. She's worked for job creation, economic development, safety, and a high quality of life for the residents of Columbus. In her previous role as chair of the Finance Committee, Councilmember Tyson led the effort to pass the city's largest ever general fund and capital improvement work. Again, key drivers to change the social determinants. As chair of the Health and Human Services and Workforce Development Committees, her work addresses many of our highest priorities, including access to healthcare and job training. I had a couple other highlights. I do want to share that some of council members' proudest achievements include investing in programs designed to create pathways out of poverty. I just want to say hello. Increasing access to food and employment opportunities and sponsoring homelessness prevention programs. Funding $1.7 million in home repairs in the Driving Park neighborhood through the James Johnson Driving Park Home Repair Program. Her list of accomplishments also goes on and on. I do invite the audience to Google all 3 of our panelists today because it's important to understand their scope and their reach and their contribution now and before. I will conclude that Councilwoman is also a proud parent of 5 adult children, and any of our parenting accolades or true accomplishments in the many roles that we as women have. So I want to take a moment and allow the participants to really appreciate the panel that joins us today. So, first question for all. From where you sit, in elected office or at the agency level, how do you see racism and bias impacting children in particular in your unique role?
So who wants to go first? I want to give deference to the people that are idle. So
no, you're going first. You're going first.
All
You're
right.
the practitioner. You go first.
I'm gonna be real quick because I want to hear what they have to say. So as you stated, Dr. Alloy, thank you. I oversee the administration of public assistance benefits in Franklin County. When you look at who's being impacted by poverty in Franklin County, you know, the numbers do not lie. It is particularly people of color and women, right? So let's take publicly funded childcare, for instance. You know, when we started the Step Up the Quality Initiative, that was a mandate from the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services and the Ohio Department of Education. You know, we have 27,000 children in my system that receive publicly funded childcare. When we started peeling that onion back, 68% of those kids were kids of color in the poorest neighborhoods in Franklin County. So if that mandate would have gone forward, provided on the date that it was supposed to, May 1st, 68% of Black children would not have been able to be entered into a quality learning center. When you look at SNAP, for instance, the food assistance program, we have about 140,000 customers that receive SNAP right now, right? So 3 times more likely our African-American families are impacted by the work requirements because they're, unfortunately, when you look at COVID, you know, many of those individuals and families were working jobs that were in service industries, businesses that had closed. So I look at racism from the perspective broken down by the categories of the benefits that we see, but you can't move away from what the policies, how the policies impact the families in looking at these benefits.
Thank you.
So I'll go next. So first of all, I am really pleased to be here with my panel members, Representative Howse, Director Bivens, and of course the moderator, Dr. Alloy. I'm really pleased to be a part of this discussion that we're having today, and certainly the audience that is listening to us share information today. When I think about bias in our, or anti-racism or bias in our community, I look at it from the standpoint that racism really impacts opportunities and resources, which many of you all probably see as educators and researchers. I mean, this can lead to really an inferior education, biased educators that treat children of color differently. Then the interpersonal and systemic racism that the parents face has the biggest impact on our children. There's limited resources and opportunities, means inferior education, housing, employment, and healthcare for the parents who are caring for our children. So for example, as the chair of Columbus City Council's Health and Human Services Committee, I hear all too often from the leaders of social service agencies that they are serving an overrepresentation of Black women. So if we look at who's being evicted in our community, 71% of evictions are single mothers, and 64% of Black women and 74% of homeless families with children are Black. So the instability that the child faces as a result of systemic racism has led to homelessness, which will impact every aspect of the child's life. This is one example.
Thank you.
So good afternoon to everyone. Director, Councilwoman, Dr. Alloy, it's such a pleasure. When we look at like how racism and bias is impacting our children in Ohio based on our policies, you know, oh goodness, I think a lot of stuff is just based on just the way, the design of our system. I always tell people we're in and operating in a system that was never designed for our children, right? So I need people, and anywhere I go, I always want people to understand this. Ohio was founded in 1803. the first, because we're going to talk about like mothering here now, I'm about to focus. The first Black woman to serve in the Ohio House of Representatives was in 1978, C. Helen Rankin from Cincinnati. Shout out for y'all in Cincinnati. That is 175 years. 175 years before the start for you even to potentially think of a Black woman who was a mother, mothering, head of household. But now from 1978, we're 42 years in, and we see it in every fabric of our society, in every fabric of our society. From our healthcare, we know about the infant mortality crisis, of how the stress and the burden of being Black is killing our babies, literally, and our mothers, right? We see it in our educational system now, as of COVID-19 has, unleashed, and in the variety of how education is being delivered to our young people, where parents have to make decisions. Do I stay home and facilitate my child's learning? I might not have all the access to the internet. I mean, the list goes on. And I would finally say, when you do get resources, because I will bring this up, just last week, the state of Ohio, the final round of community cares money was like $660 million. And it's new money. And instead of allocating the money based on the impact we know, because in Ohio, we are actually tracking data from hospitalizations and how people die. Instead of allocating those resources according to some type of more equity basis, we decided to do a per capita allocation of resources. And so the communities that are most impacted from COVID-19 then get less resources. Mm-hmm. This is how it shows up. I mean, just last week, it's a sure demonstration of policy of how our babies are impacted. So I'll stop there.
So the task of, thank you so much. The task of moderating is never easy. I'm looking at the clock, I'm looking at the list of questions. So I'm gonna do what they actually hired me to do today, and that is really facilitate this conversation. So I'm gonna take us straight to where the rubber hits the road and ask this. What types of action steps do you recommend for our audience to advance racial equity and anti-racism work, particularly from your unique points of view, legislative, community-based? How can we really begin to make change? For example, a question in the chat, in the question box, is what resources are available to these women, children, and fathers to help overcome those hardships? How can we as citizenry advocate for fair distribution of resources that affect our area? What are some real action strategies that we can begin to implement that we can talk about for the time that we have on this panel, so that our audience could leave here as agents of change?
Right. I'm just going to give one, and I'm going to let Representative Howse and Councilmember Tyson take this one, because this is their legislative work, and I think they've done a beautiful job. One of the things I would just say is this: you can't advocate for change if you don't have people at the table who's being impacted by policies that impact them in a disproportionate way. So whatever we do, we have to make sure that we bring the people to the table who's being impacted, so they have a say-so in what policies and systems that need to change for them. So we need to start by listening, and also for the community, we need to show up when we're invited to the table on these issues.
Beautiful. Bring the voices of the affected people to the table. And on the other side, our homework, our housework is to make sure that we show up and participate. Beautiful. Thank you, Director Bivens.
So I will chime in if you don't mind. So I'm in the words of Senator Cory Booker, stand up, speak up, and act up. I need people to understand it. Stand up, speak up, act up. We are all in places where we hear things, we see things, and we have to stop being bystanders. When we see these policies, these conversations that are not right, we have to begin to intervene. And that sometimes that means a sacrifice. You might lose your job. You might get them. Like, this is a type of work. If we're trying to get a different system, people have to be willing to put that skin in the game, because ancestors before us did that for us. You know what I'm saying? So I feel like we owe that back to them. Also, as the director talked about listening, I think we also have to help people really focus on one thing, but also envision what they truly want it to be like, right? So we have this movement of people talking about different things, but then you ask them what it means. It sounds good, but they don't really know what victory looked like. You know what I'm saying? And so we have to help people articulate that vision of victory for communities and for our babies, so that you keep saying it, you believe it, and then we have the energy and the synergy to put the people in places to do that. So that's kind of my suggestions, and we can go from there.
Nice.
I'll just mention that I agree with everything that Representative Howse and Director Bivens has certainly stated, but I think that we also are just really required to make sure that we're speaking up. As I stated, you cannot be afraid to be able to have conversations. You cannot be able to speak truth to power. And so I think it's important, and I know that Representative Howse and certainly Commissioner Kevin Boyce, they both passed resolutions that said racism is a public health crisis. And I did that at Columbus City Council. And it's important to be able to even to state that, because some people believe that it really isn't an issue. I mean, I have to say this, when I came over to the State House and to provide input regarding racism as a public health crisis, it's interesting, everyone doesn't even believe that racism is an issue, or racism, we are in crisis. And so for us to be able to state that statement is extremely important, to declare that racism does exist. And if you never declare that, it's very difficult for the conversation that we're having today for change to occur, because you don't even recognize that there is a difference in how people in our communities and in the state of Ohio, where we live, that people are treated differently. And so I am pleased to just make this last comment that when we passed this resolution, 3,200 business leaders also signed on to this. And that was important. This was done by Jenny's Ice Cream, John Lowe, and a woman named Haley Bollinger. It was important to do that because before change is going to even happen, it has to be acknowledged. And so that means we have to speak up and share, we have to use our voices to be able to say that racism does exist for change to occur.
So Councilmember Tyson and Representative Howse, what types of change would you like to see come about as a result of the resolution? What are some action strategies that you would like to see in place?
Well, I'll give you a couple examples. So just one is that that individuals have to begin to understand the history of Black and Brown people, to be able to do that, to also to be able to, once they have acknowledged that information, have done the homework, that they then are able to stand up and talk and share those conversations with the people with whom they interact. But it also is based upon that information that you act differently, that you're able to say that, you know, we need to make policies that really affect the people that are not having their best quality of life. So those are some of the things I would share. I mean, I have lots I can share, but I'll let Representative Howse share some also.
I hope we have time for more. Representative Howse, what are your thoughts?
Yes, for the resolution, it has not passed in the General Assembly yet, which is unfortunate. It's gotten some movement in the Senate, none in the House. And what this resolution will do, as Councilwoman Tyson indicated, when you have people who don't even believe that racism is real, the state of Ohio, you cannot acknowledge a problem that you are not willing to acknowledge. So that's the first thing. The second thing it does is provide kind of like a glossary of sorts of racism, you know, because we have to do a lot of teaching, right? And then within the other elements within the resolution, it's specifically looking at the policies, taking a look at the Ohio Revised Code and looking through it through an equity lens, specifically meaning if you didn't have these some barriers up front, how could we, help people who have been impacted throughout the lines? What does it look like in our hiring practices, in our contracting practices? how can we partner specifically with organizations who are proven and have a demonstration to actually teach racial equity and implicit bias, and I'm saying proven, to train us. You know, I think one of the greatest disservices that we are doing for the state of Ohio is that state legislators don't have an idea or a concept of it. So it is hard to have that lens of the policy when we're not trained to do it. You know, if many people can remember, during the Senate hearings, there was a scuffle between, verbal scuffle from a senator who was a medical doctor with the director of minority health. Now, after that moment, and I always say this is the disservice we do ourselves, because we didn't prepare legislators to fully engage now, because we know we all have racist tendencies because we're in a racist environment. Everybody. It's just how are we able to use that bias and it influence in the policies? So, you know, those are the things that are kind of laid out in the resolution for us to do the work to truly get to an Ohio that is inclusive and works for everyone and fulfilling the Ohio promise that you can live, retire here, and be safe, because that's what everybody wants.
Wow, truth. I wanted just to frame one other piece of work. We've heard throughout the day and obviously on our panel that there are people that don't believe that racism is a bona fide and real problem. And I've come to believe that it's because it's designed to work invisibly. It has been invisible to the beneficiaries of the system for hundreds of years, right? They've been benefiting from these systems. And then people of color have been experiencing the lack of access and the lack of benefit of the system, visible to us for multiple generations. I think if we can be crystallizing why there's a denial about racism, it's important because, again, most of majority culture has been experiencing the benefit of these systems, but it's not been seen to them, right? It's been an invisible privilege, if you will, an invisible benefit. If we were going to fast forward our needles 6 months, 1 year, what would be some of the types of examples of change that you would like to see throughout our state at various levels? And if we could start maybe even at a county level. I know, Director Bivens, you have programs that are specifically designed to make changes in access and outcome. So what might things look like if we're really moving our needle? And I'm sorry to catch you off guard.
No, that's okay. And just for the sake of time, you know, one of the things when you talk about racism being a public health crisis, just from the county perspective, you know, as a system leader, I have to own that. And then everything that I do going forward, not that I didn't do it before, I have to be intentional about the programs that I fund, look at who's being impacted, and then question those who are receiving dollars on who sits on their boards. Are they just checking boxes? What are their cultures looking like? You know, and then the other thing is what I would like to see when you look at, and I'm going to say the data, again, going back to just the Step Up the Quality Initiative, when legislation is passed and we know that it's going to impact Black and brown people who already fall behind on every social determinant of health, whatever determinant you pick, we have to be at the table as system leaders speaking up, saying, hey, how do we make this equitable? If this is going to be the policy, if you're going to make a Step Up to Quality mandate, do we provide the resources? Are we funding those providers? Big Mama who's seeing children in her home, and in addition to the large centers who may have a lot of resources. Have we made equitable resources so that these centers and children can have, you know, equitable opportunity? I also would like to see, you know, from the perspective of early childhood, right? So we know that 74% of African-American children are not ready for kindergarten right now when they enter in. How do we change the trajectory of that? That has to be a system of racism, because when you go back, it's the same number. We can no longer keep looking at the data and seeing who's being impacted, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 100 years, and dismiss it. The data tells us what it is.
Appreciate that. Reactions?
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
Audience as well, audience participation. I'll monitor the chat room.
Oh, so I agree 100% with what Director Bivens has just shared. You know, that's what which led me to, I created 2 years ago the Commission on Black Girls, and the report just came out July the 30th. And what we looked at was that certainly when you think about our community right now, and certainly looking at Black women, as I was stating earlier about Black women being evicted, or who's being Black women who are homeless, or we know that our Black babies are dying 2.5 times or more than white babies, or that Black women make 60 to 63 cents on the dollar. I mean, you look at all these inequities that have been going on, that have been long-standing. So it's like, how are we going to begin to change that? How do we change the trajectory of Black women who are most affected by poverty, and racism is the foundation of them being affected by this? So created the Commission on Black Girls, and I would hope that, and it's for girls 11 to 22, looking at their overall quality of life. So when I think about just one statistic that from serving our girls, 422 girls, 70% of the girls have had some sort of out of school, in school, suspension, detention, expulsion. And so sometimes that's anywhere from 3 to 5 times higher for Black girls than for white girls. So do I want to see that continue? No, I don't. That should not continue, but the data matters. And so my vision was that we all have, the same opportunity to thrive. And that includes reducing and eliminating preferential opportunities for some, while subjecting people of color, certainly of color, to hardships and disadvantages. That a year from now that, we are continuing to have discussions like we're having right now, because we also know that, a few months ago, the Pew Research study stated that 50% of adults had expressed, now are expressing that at least support of life matters. But in June, though, it was 67%. So we've got to continue to have these conversations and move the needle forward, that these conversations don't die. And that I also think that it's going to be important that we're going to have to see more companies and organizations investing in Black home ownership. Like Nationwide's put $1 million in this, and making investments in the Black community, like Netflix just did with the Black colleges. We've got to also make sure that communities, for-profit institutions, are absolutely making sure, understanding what is going on in the Black community, to be able to help enhance the quality of life for the Black community.
Representative Howse.
Yeah, so what would I envision to see it of how the state of Ohio operates? So I will tell you, we talked about data here. There is so much data that we don't collect because we don't want to know the truth, right? So in a year from now, I want us to actually collect the data so we can actually see what we're doing and what we're not doing. But then more importantly, put us on the pathway to do something about it. So unlike the Ohio Department of Transportation that released a disparity study in 2015 that specifically outlined that Black, Hispanic, and AAPI communities who were qualified knew that they were not getting the contracts that they were supposed to, and they labeled it as passive discrimination based on financial institutions. Well, I would want, after we pass this resolutions, that the state legislature would put policies in place going after the financial industry to ensure that qualified companies get their due share so that they are fully licensed and bonded to participate in this thing called the the American dream, the economic vitality. Furthermore, we could have conversations about, when we look at, I always say it's a business of poverty. Let's be very clear. In the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services, what would it look like if we actually evaluated how much money does it actually cost, to maintain poverty, right? From the food assistance, from the child care assistance, from the housing assistance. How much money is that actually costing? And what would it look like if we shifted those dollars, because somebody's getting paid for it? Why couldn't we just shift it to give it to families?
Right.
Up front. You know what I'm saying? But again, that's what I know people were like, oh, that's radical. I feel like this is common sense stuff. Like, for real, like, this is not radical. It is not radical. It is not out there. This is stuff that is within our reach. And most of us would be less stressful. People would have lighter caseloads. We would have some peace, and people would be able to chill. You know what I'm saying? But so when I was talking about stand up, speak up, act up, this system has been comfortable for way too long. And in order to not just have a resolution out there, but like I said, like this is the vision that I have for the General Assembly. Like, you have to articulate it and say it, and that's where I want it. It might not happen, but I'm putting it out there, like, because we can get this, and people want that. So
she can say it, and I'm going to amen it because I can't say it, but thank you, Representative Howse.
Thank you. It's the idea that we have to disrupt sometimes status quo to have change. Very, very important. And you're also speaking to language that we're seeing in the country. It's the business case for equity. We're
Right.
going to save trillions of dollars, right, when we start doing business in a more equitable way. So this system is costing, and there are people benefiting, and you're right, it's the business case for equity, for health equity, for racial equity. That's what it boils down to. All right, well, I'm monitoring the box right now to see if our audience, we really have time for some audience questions and participation. And so I'm going to ask for Jamie's help and other help in looking at the chat box to see if there's anything we want to bring forward. Lots of thank you. People are cheering. They said they're glad it's on Zoom because everybody's just standing up and down and going, amen, amen.
Dr. Alloy,
yes.
if you check the chat, if you check the Q&A box, there's a handful of questions there, or you can look at the chat, but the chat has a lot more, it's harder to track.
All right, I'm in the Q&A box. Let's see what we've got. Are there evaluation efforts being undertaken to ensure that initiatives are effective and moving the needle in the direction that we'd like to see with respect to anti-racist practice? Are there evaluation efforts underway?
No. I mean, no. I mean, seriously, like, we got to think about, I mean, right now, like, on a federal level, when they, like, people are trying to desensitize and financially penalize people just from doing the training. So no.
All right.
So from the Board of Commissioners, just really quick, from the Board of Commissioners perspective, we have contracted with Courtney Kerrigan from Raise the Bar, because when we did the Poverty Blueprint Plan, we brought in the Racial Equity Institute to do the racial equity training. The commissioners now, we are working on our plan that we should be coming out here soon on our mission or goals for the community to hold us accountable. So that should be forthcoming. It just did its rounds through the commissioners, so that should be forthcoming here soon.
All right.
And I do think there's, in terms of, there are certain ways that we are being held accountable. So we did a disparity study in the city of Columbus looking at the disparities of minority-owned and minority and women-owned businesses. So there's data from that we have to be held accountable to. There's data from, in terms of, like, at City Council, we are certainly focused on, our race and equity training just for just council, so that we can be one for council. And then looking at it from the standpoint of the legislation that we pass, as well as the initiatives that we're able to focus on, that they all have this racial and equity lens, to be able to have goals, to be able to make sure that we are ensuring that Black and brown individuals and individuals of color have an opportunity to be able to move forward. So there are, we don't have enough data, but we have data that will continue to help us to make sure that change is occurring, because if not, it really isn't, there's no value in doing all this work. So we know that individuals, we need to enhance the quality of life of Black and brown people in our community, and we have to hold ourselves accountable to make sure that happens.
Excellent. There's a comment in the box I'd like to try to get some response to. It reads, W.E.B. Du Bois in the 1950s described the problem of racism. And he wrote, "We have discussed, studied, and produced the data. The question now is, what is our process?" Whoops, lost my question. What is our process for actionable strategies to move on what we already know is the case? I think I moved right past one part of that comment, and I apologize. So that's the question. What are some actionable strategies? So
I'm gonna couple this with the question that says, how can we help ensure our voices are heard, and when we contact our representatives and elected officials? So the first thing, you have to have people in office that are going to do your bidding. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing, right? But the other thing because again, yeah, you just have to have people in office, and not just, you have to have enough people, right? See, this is the thing about understanding the rules. Each legislative body is very different, and you need to know the rules. How many people do you need in that body to pass something, and then get those peoples in there? And then how do you have people responsive to your, like, just to your concerns? We have to understand that this is about influence. Most of us go on a one-to-one basis. That's not how I would suggest people do it. You need to come with a group of 50, a group of 100, a group of 1,000. If you have 50 people asking you the same questions, it's hard, it's very easy to ignore one person, but you can't ignore 50. And a lot of us, and you got to have different strategies, because some people, they never respond, but you figure out that they're going to be somewhere publicly, have 100 people show up with that question. You know what I'm saying? It's like you got to have like different strategies, but understanding it's not a one-off. Like that's not how this system was set up, even though that's what we try to tell people. One person, one vote, one person, one vote. But this is about influence. And you have to be very strategic in trying to, and working to get the policies that you want to get changed. So that's kind of my simple version, which I said a lot, but hopefully y'all understand.
All right, we're into the 1 minute mark remaining. I just want to ask, there's one other question that says, how can we help to ensure our voices are heard when we contact our representatives and elected officials?
Yeah, I think Stephanie answered the question, but I also have to say, and maybe my body is smaller, so in terms of city council, there's 7 members, but we have a responsibility of responding to one individual or 50 individuals. One individual or 50. And so I would, for your voice to be heard, I would also say, understand how that whatever legislative body that you are trying to present to understand that. So at the county, they have 3 county commissioners, and they meet on Tuesday mornings. At the council members, we meet every Monday evening. Of course, now it's virtual, but every Monday at 5 o'clock. And so based upon that, you can certainly, after every council meeting, you can certainly share any issues or concerns, but you also can contact any of our offices. I mean, each of us has specific committees that we chair, but however, you can certainly, contact council members' offices to be able to get a response. And our jobs are to work for you. Our jobs are to work for you. And I also have to say, I agree with Stephanie, is that we have to really know who cares about the issues that you care about. And then making sure that there are people there, that you're also, electing people that are also care about the same issues that you care about, and are not going to be afraid to speak up and make change occur.
I want to thank everybody. Oh, go ahead. Were you going to say something, Ms. Joy?
I was just going to say before, you can make your voice heard by voting. If you have not registered to vote, register to vote, but please make sure you vote.
There it is.
Right.
We were on a tight time frame. I think we covered a lot of territory in the time that we have, and trying to keep us on time. We could probably use more time to talk in depth about some of your individual programmatic initiatives and the outcomes that you've seen, to really give some examples of initiatives that are working to move the racial equity needle. But I want to thank my esteemed panel, Director Joy Bivens, Representative Stephanie Howse, and Councilmember Priscilla Tyson for your illuminating and invigorating data and inspirations to continue in this most critical space of bringing equity to all people, particularly Black and Brown people in the state of Ohio. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
And I see the Director Justice is back.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Alloy, Director Bivens, Representative Howse, Councilwoman Tyson. I am just tickled that we brought you 4 together and shine the spotlight on some really incredible political leaders that we have here. I have to tell you, there's a lot that's going on that's depressing, and having strong, data-driven women as our leaders is a great way for us all to head into the weekend. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We have come to the close of our 7th annual Symposium on Children. And I hope that you have found, like I have, that today's sessions were inspiring, informative, educating, that's not the right word, we'll just move on. And that the day today has helped us all to stay committed to our own journey and our journey together towards eradicating racism via anti-bias and anti-racist practices. As I quoted earlier, Professor D.L. Stewart of Colorado State, who said yesterday, to do better, we need to know better. And if knowledge is power, our collective power has been amplified today to help us have the energy and the bearing to continue our work to eradicate bias and racism in early childhood education. I want to thank you for being here all day. I want to thank our keynote, Dr. Iruka, amazing, amazing person. I want to thank all of our incredible panelists who gave their time and knowledge to be with us today. I need to thank two very, very special people, Jamie O'Leary and Kathy Kupsky of the Crane Center. You have no idea what goes into making something like this work. I also want to acknowledge with gratitude our outstanding ASL interpreters, Lily, Linda, and Chrissy. I know this is exhausting work. And our captioner, Bonnie, I jumped on earlier on watching it on my handheld, and I was watching the captioning, and I was really mesmerized by the accuracy and the pace that you do this, so thank you. We've asked a special friend of the Crane Center to come here and be with us today and offer closing remarks. Dr. James Moore is a person that we really like and appreciate and partner with on certain initiatives. James Moore III is the Vice Provost for Diversity Inclusion and the Chief Diversity Officer for The Ohio State University. As one of the biggest and best public universities in the US, you can imagine he has a really massive job. He's also the College of Education and Community College's Distinguished Professor of Urban Education and Executive Director of the Todd Anthony Bell National Resource Center. Dr. Moore, we asked him to come here because he is the Ohio State University's primary thought leader around diversity inclusions at the university level. And he has really helped over time. He's really been a champion at this university for pushing strategic diversity initiatives and helping us move forward as an institution. And so I'm going to turn this over to James to close out the day. And when he's finished, our day has come to an end. And we will see you next year. And please stay in touch with us. We are thrilled you're here for this very important topic. Dr. Moore, I turn it over to you.
Thank you for that introduction, Dr. Justice. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today after a full day of dialogue and learning. I'm from rural South Carolina, so I know well the importance of planting in the spring and harvesting in later. That's what you all done today, planted seeds for a bumper crop of anti-racism action to come. I was heartened recently to hear Ohio State's new President Christina Johnson speak so forcefully about the importance of being actively an anti-racist institution. Yet we'd also see those in our highest office failing to condemn the forces of white supremacy. So we know this anti-racist attitude is far from being embraced by all. Many years ago, the brilliant writer James Baldwin said, I quote, "I love America more than any other country in the world. And exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually," end quote. In the spirit of Baldwin, I come to say that the great paradox of our country, that as our material wealth grows, the disparities of our beloved country grow more vast and endangers our society. We know early childhood education is so important. It helps students get their footing academically and get on the right track to future success. It's well documented that early childhood programs like Universal Pre-K increase academics of students down the road. That's the reason that policymakers, even in the conservative states like Oklahoma, plow money into universal pre-K. We need robust early childhood education because in our country, and especially in this state, the quality of your K-12 education is still greatly determined by your zip code. That's not James saying that. That's the opinion of Ohio Supreme Court, which ruled 3 times in 1997, 2000, and 2002 that Ohio schools funding system was unconstitutional. Why? Because an over-reliance on locally voted property taxes meant it was neither thorough nor efficient as required by the state constitution. That's appalling and shameful. It is a stain on the state aspiring to take a quantum leap forward into a new economic future that leaves behind the manufactured smokestacks of the past. These educational disparities across the state have real world consequences that eventually land on higher education's doorstep. Here in our beloved Office of Diversity and Inclusion, we see these disparities often at play in work we do with our Young Scholars Program. These are first generation students from families of modest means from our beloved Ohio's urban centers who are offered a scholarship to Ohio State provided that they meet certain academic standards throughout high school and college. We've developed a summer academy for the high school years, special enrichment activities and other activities that supplement and augment the instruction they see in their regular classrooms. We do that because we need to help them keep pace academically with the offerings available in the funded districts. The reality is we need rigor in our K-12 urban classrooms on par with what we see in our more affluent schools. As we work to overcome the systemic issues that confront our students, we must never give into the soft bigotry of low expectations that lowers for Black and brown students. Because even with all these hurdles placed in their way, our resilient students show that given the chance, they still can do amazing things. YSP students like the Tolliver sisters from Akron demonstrate this valuable lesson. 3 sisters, one is a family medicine clinician at Wexner Medical Center. The second, an attorney who works for the Ohio Supreme Court. And the youngest, now off doing her medical residency in dermatology after graduating from our medical school at Ohio State University. But how many other smart siblings like the Tollivers fall through the cracks? We're losing far too many promising students before they ever reach our doors. The reality is we need to tap into the underserved, under-resourced areas of our country in order to find the talent we need to solve some of the world's most pressing problems. And while we can spotlight wonderful success stories taking place today, the overall story of 2020 is truly one of increasing educational disparities. With the nation's largest school districts all moving to remote learning, the digital divide in our country has become even more glaring. For example, in Cleveland Metropolitan School District, a district survey this spring showed 2/3 of students don't have connected devices and 40% don't have access to the internet at home. This is a pattern you see across our nation, the United States. The students who can least afford to fall behind are having the most problems connecting to this virtual world. National studies show as many as 1 in 6 children in our country don't have access to the internet at home. And those same studies show this problem landing most heavily on Black, Latino, and low-income students. We saw it even in our own YSP for high schools. We needed to launch a fundraising initiative to ensure that all of our Summer Academy scholars had access to connected devices. This is a national problem that would only grow as this pandemic lingers, perhaps not stretching into the fall school year of 2021. So I've traced for you the inherent challenges of access to quality educational experiences in our K-12 world. And we've talked a little about the crisis that is only worsened our disparities crisis through a glaring digital divide. Please circle back and consider what a world would look like that's more actively anti-racist. If you were able to put the policies in practice that you've discussed today, how does your world change? I think a hint at what lies ahead is found in the rising generation, who's linked in arms and solidarity to come together equity and justice this year. I see them every day in my work at ODI. These are the students from every racial, ethnic background who are agents of social change. These are the students that graduate with collaborative skills and inclusive outlooks for our beloved United States. Together, these students are creating a world where we're judged less on our phenotype and more on our beliefs and our attitudes. I hope you understand the importance of the work you will undertake. You are part of a movement that has the power to change our society, one child at a time. Thank you for your time today. Go Buckeyes.